Hello, ladies and gentlemen, Gapesta here. This is heroic Gorefiend, and this fight is interesting. I like it a lot. It's not too complicated, but it can be moderately difficult. It relies on the majority of the raid, basically performing basic, movement, positioning requirements, really nothing fancy. But there's a high DPS check throughout the fight for when players go down in the stomach phase, and you will transition from the normal phase to the stomach and back and forth throughout the fight based on ability casts that the boss will do, as well as if you happen to die accidentally. Rather than dying outright, you'll go to the stomach the first time anyway. And doing this allows you to deal with some of the ads that are down there. If you don't deal with the ads, they will come up top, and you'll have to deal with them up top, which they're much more difficult up there. So the basic goal is to do the stomach phase effectively and efficiently, and then you don't have to really worry about stuff up top as much. So to begin, let's first talk about the Shadow of Death ability and how you get into the stomach. For the most part in this fight, ideally, players will enter the stomach from the Shadow of Death ability. And this is used very frequently in a very strange and hard to keep track of pattern. But thanks to wowhead.com, you can see the actual numbers on this table here. So props to them for this. The time on the left, of course, is the time into the fight or the time into the particular phase. The roll, of course, is self-explanatory. The number along the top is the number of people in your raid. And then the actual cells in the table show what time period, based on how many number of people in the raid, that number of role players will be sucked down into the stomach realm with Shadow of Death. So, for example, in the first round, right at the start when DPS go in, if you have 18 people, 2 DPS will go in. But if you have 19 people, 3 DPS will go in. And they tried to balance these numbers as much as possible, but you can see it's pretty complicated. I only provide this information just because I think it's interesting, and I think Wowhead did a good job for it. You really don't need to know it unless you're planning some very explicit strategies, but you just need to know that this is a complicated ability in terms of the timer and who will get dragged down at any given moment, and therefore, people will vanish, and you might wonder why or when. So that gives you an idea of when it's going to happen and to whom. So mechanically, once you're dragged into the stomach, whether it's from Shadow of Death or from, quote, dying in the normal realm, the first time you die anyway, you'll be sent down to the stomach in either case. You'll immediately gain a digest debuff, which is 40 seconds. And when this expires, if you're still in the stomach, you'll be digested completely and you'll actually die. So that's no good. So you have to ensure that if you go in the stomach, you exit when your digest debuff has 5 seconds left or thereabouts. To exit, you simply step into the center, maybe esophagus, I guess it might be, and climb your way back out. As gross as that is, but quite awesome too. Now, each of the 3 different roles, tank, healer, and DPS, will have different duties that they generally need to perform while they're within the stomach. And it's moderately balanced based on the number of people that are sent for those roles. So one tank will go down at one time. You can see I am a tank role, of course, so my job is to pick up the Enraged Spirit. It's a single mob that will spawn down here. And it has 2 basic abilities. The first is a ground slam effect that will leave a pool on the ground. If you stand in it, you gain stacking dot, so you don't want to do that. So just sidestep that. And then his other ability is an interruptible cast called Bellowing Shout. And if you allow that to go off, the mob will do 300% more damage for about 10 seconds. So you need to interrupt every cast of that. And that's pretty much it. The tank's job there is to push the spirit to about 60 to 70% health, and it will automatically exit the stomach on its own and go attack the raid. So as a tank, you have that 40-second digest period to DPS that spirit down enough that it will transfer. If your tank has extremely difficult time doing this for some reason, their damage is not up to par, They can get assistance from DPS players that are down here, but it's generally best if the tank can handle it on his or her own, so that DPS can focus on what they're supposed to do. So speaking of DPS, when they are in the stomach, they need to attack the shadowy constructs, which are the spooky skeletons that are down here. And they will spawn on the outside of the room and walk toward the center, trying to reach the exit. Your goal is to kill them before they reach the exit and therefore teleport outside. There generally are going to be more constructs spawning than the DPS that are meant to be downstairs can actually deal with. That's not to say that if some people accidentally die up top, and those DPS will then be able to help downstairs and probably deal with it. But for the most part, it's okay if one or two constructs per phase that you're down there as a DPS actually escapes. They're probably more than you're going to be able to deal with, unless you have particularly high DPS or whatever. And but still, the goal is to kill as many as you can, or get as many as you can very low health. Because these mobs spawn up top, basically based on the damage that you dealt, inversely based on the damage you dealt to them, the more damage you do down below in the stomach, the better it is when you have to deal with them up top. So even if you can't outright kill a particular mob downstairs, it's still okay to get it to 20% or something, and just oops, I couldn't finish it off. Now for healers, you need to heal up the Tortured Essence mobs, which are friendly, and they will spawn just like the constructs on the outside of the edges of the room and walk toward the center trying to exit. And so if a healer is downstairs, it really helps to have a /target Tortured Essence macro. I believe I confirmed with our healers that works, although I don't know 100% offhand. But the idea is still the same. You need to spam heal the Tortured Essence. If you can get it to 100% health, it will not exit. Therefore, you will effectively have removed it from the fight. So you're just like DPS roll, except just, healing instead of doing damage. So once all the stomach mobs actually reach the center and travel up the esophagus and go outside, they will break free from their bonds essentially and become a living version of themselves that spawns in a random location around the top realm and needs to be dealt with by the raid. To do this, there are 3 different mob types, just like the ones that correlate with their stomach counterpart. So the tank mob, the Enraged Spirit, becomes a Gorebound Spirit. And this will still cast Bellowing Shout, which again needs to be interrupted up top, just like it did below. It will not leave the puddles on the ground, thankfully, so the tanks don't have to move around a whole lot. But it will instead stack Fell Flames, which is a stacking debuff. And this is the main tank swap mechanic on this fight. So you'll see here in just a moment, once I do enough damage to actually push this guy, and we go back up top, this Enraged Spirit will have pretty much spawned by the time I get out there. So there you can see, there it's popped up. And so it's really important that the tank is quick to target it and taunt it over so it doesn't kill somebody. It's also a good idea for your tank that's already up top still on the boss to prepare for the spirit to come out and bring it over there. Anyway, once it's out, you just need to keep it in melee range on the tanks and tank swap it based on the Fell Flame stacks. It's not too difficult. And then just keep interrupting it. The other mob types, the constructs, become Gorebound constructs, and they will essentially fixate on a random raid member. And there'll be a beam indicating where the Gorebound is going toward, who the Gorebound is targeting. If it reaches that player, they will die. So again, just like throughout the fight, if you die and you haven't been in the stomach recently, you can go down the stomach temporarily. But otherwise, you're going to legit die. So don't let the constructs up top reach you if they're fixated on you. You can kite them, so you need to do that while other people help you kill them off, generally range DPS. But melee can help because they will only explode on the fixated player. And then finally, the essences become Gorebound Essence. And these are just caster mobs that will mostly just stand still and chain cast Spirit Volley, which does damage to everyone, but it also reduces movement, and they kind of increase the damage over time. So you can kind of see the volley shots coming from an essence just at the bottom of my viewport there. So they're just chain casting. So just like the constructs, these need to be killed off quickly so that they don't get too much damage going on the raid. And as mentioned in the earlier section, the goal in the stomach phase is to kill off, or in the case of the healers, heal up the essences as much as you can down below, because that will prevent them from spawning up top. If the stomach teams are doing a very poor job, tons of mobs will spawn up top, and it's going to probably overwhelm you. So the first and only real goal in this fight is handling that stomach phase properly and doing it efficiently and effectively. And also I mentioned the amount of damage and or healing that you do to an ad down below is inversely proportional to what happens when it spawns up top. So if you get a construct, if you're a DPS and you get a construct to 20% health and it comes up top, it will still have 20% health when it's up here, so it's easier to kill. Whereas if it was 100% health, it'll still have 100% up top. The healer ones are inverse, so if you heal a mob up to 80% health, it will pop up top at 20%. And the tank mob also just remembers its health. So the more damage you do below, the more healing you do below, the better it is when it returns. Now up top, other than the ads, which are the primary, focus of this fight, Gorefiend has a few abilities of his own that you'll have to watch for. The first of which is Touch of Doom and Doomwell. So Touch of Doom is cast on a few random raid members, and after it detonates, after 8 seconds, it will leave a puddle at their location. So you can see kind of in the back of the room there on the sides, there's some puddles already that go out. The basic idea here is when you get Touch of Doom, you have 8 seconds to find a position against the outside edge of the room, against a wall, anywhere away from where all the action is happening, to detonate, drop the puddle, and then get back into a kind of normal position. If you screw this up and you get too many puddles kind of in the center, you're going to have a very difficult time later in the fight because there just won't be enough room for people to move around to avoid things. The boss also casts Shared Link about every 30 seconds, and this will target 3 random raid members. And while these players are linked together, they will take pretty moderate damage every second until it's broken. However, they also deal damage in a small radius around them, and the only way to break the link is for all 3 players to get within a few yards of one another, 5 or 6 yards. So basically melee range. However, one of the 3 players is randomly rooted in place. So it is critical that the 2 players that are not rooted quickly identify which player they're linked to, because it just forms a sort of a 3-way link. So you can see which direction you need to go based on the indicator and quickly run to that player's position. So rule of thumb, if you get link, start immediately running toward whichever direction the link graphic actually shows you. The boss will also frequently cast Surging Shadows, and this is the primary reason that the raid needs to be spread out in this fight. There are other abilities, of course, that require spread, but this is the main one. Essentially, it does shadow damage to anyone within 5 yards of you when it's cast. So if the entire raid is stacked up and this gets cast, boom, you all die. But if you're all spread, it won't deal any damage at all because it's only damage to people nearby you. It doesn't hit you yourself. And then the last ability is kind of a cool graphic you've probably seen throughout the footage here, which is Crushing Darkness. He'll basically spawn a swirl pattern of explosions. You can see it going off there. And as you might guess, if you stand one of these, you take damage. So don't. It might take some getting used to kind of see what the pattern is like, the sort of spiral that it makes. But just after a couple attempts, you'll get quite used to it and be able to sidestep it pretty easily, even as it's initially spawning. So you're not ever threatened by it. So you may notice that the boss has energy that he's been draining throughout the fight. And after about 2 minutes, he will fully drain his energy, and he will begin the Feast of Souls phase. This phase is really where you're going to do the majority of your damage to the boss. So you're going to spend a lot of time in most of the fight just dealing with adds and all the chaos and the movement that's required. And it's going to feel like you're not really doing much to the boss. But the reality is, it's because this phase lets you make up for it. So once he casts this and begins channeling, it will last 60 seconds maximum. During this period, the boss does damage to the entire raid, but he also takes 100% increased damage. He also will not cast any of his other abilities, so other than the ticking damage on the raid from the Feast of Souls and these little orbs, we'll talk about in a second, there's no damage going on. So there's no reason not to stack the raid in melee range to increase healing output and, of course, maximize damage, which you do anyway. This is also the ideal time to use big DPS cooldowns, bloodlusts, all that good stuff. So if you can do so, try to save that stuff. Like I said, Feast of Souls starts about 2 minutes into the fight and it lasts a minute. So the rotation is essentially every 3 minutes you're going to get one of these phases, so you can just save your cooldowns for that appropriately. Now you'll notice that during this phase, the entire raid, except for myself, are stacked up in melee. But my job as a tank during this phase is to actually run around outside the raid and soak these little tiny orbs that are flying toward the boss. These are unstable souls, and essentially they will just spawn kind of in random locations around the outside edge of the room and try to reach the boss. If they reach the boss, they will energize him, basically giving him energy back and reducing the time that you spend in the phase, which is bad. The more time you spend in this phase, the more damage you'll do. It's really easy, all that good stuff. The souls themselves, when you touch them, they will do a bit of damage to the entire raid, but they also deal damage to anyone within 10 yards of the location that the soul exploded at. So that's why you need someone, ideally a tank probably, to soak these souls away from the raid. If you let them touch the boss, it energizes them, and if you let them touch a raid member, it probably explodes and hits the majority of the raid. So as soon as this phase begins, have your tank, if you're just using one, or both tanks if you need to, because the boss doesn't attack during this, move out to the sides and start soaking these. As a monk tank, I'm able to do this by myself because of roll, and for the most part, it's not a problem, and teleport and all that, but it's absolutely fine to use two tanks, just have one cover one side, one cover the other. The loss and damage from the off tank during this phase is not super big, so you can afford to do that. Alright, so to finish up, we'll start with the DPS tips for this fight, just to summarize. Remember to always prioritize killing adds in this fight instead of the boss. You will have plenty of time and ability to DPS the boss during Feast of Souls, but for the majority of the encounter, it's always about adds first. Try to save your DPS cooldowns accordingly for the Feast of Souls when the boss is going to take double damage. If you're in the stomach realm, make sure you focus on killing the construct adds as quickly as you can. If you let a few of them escape, it's okay, but just try to do at least some damage to every spawn that comes up if you can, especially if you can't kill them all. When Shared Fate links you in the top realm, make sure you quickly identify if you can move who you are linked to by following the graphic and run toward them immediately. Once everyone's stacked together, you'll drop the debuff. When you get Touch of Doomed in the top phase, quickly run to the outside edge or wall somewhere away from everyone, and you'll drop a puddle when the debuff expires after 8 seconds. And then finally, when Hunger for Life, in the top phase, you're going to be kiting a slowed construct. If it touches you, you die, so make sure you run away from it. Now for tank tips on this fight, not a whole lot going on for tanks, it's pretty easy. In the stomach realm, quickly DPS the Enraged Spirit, and try to push it down to 60 or 70% so it phases and exits as quickly as possible. But while you're doing that, make sure you dodge the ground attack effect so you don't take extra stacks from that. And you interrupt the Bellowing Shout attack, because if that gets buffed on that thing, it's probably going to kill you pretty quickly, unless you have a healer helping you. When you emerge from the stomach, make sure you quickly taunt the now converted Gorefiend Spirit onto you. Also, it's probably not a bad idea to warn your tank partner when the spirit down below is actually coming up. So when you've pushed it over and it's going to the center to exit, so that that player can be ready to taunt it into position as well. Otherwise, it might randomly kill somebody in the raid. You'll also want to swap the Gorefiend Spirit up top between the tanks, depending on how your survival is based on the Fell Flame stacks. It doesn't last very long, the debuff itself, so you can swap around 4 stacks or so. Finally, during Feast of Souls, particularly if you're using 2 tanks for this, make sure you stand behind the raid, kind of toward the outside edges of the room like you're seeing here, and soak up all of the souls that will float in. If they touch the boss or the raid, it's pretty bad, so try to get every single one of these. And then for healer tips, much of it is the same as DPS, of course. In this case, for healers, you probably want to use cooldowns for the Feast of Souls phase. This is where most of the raid damage will come in. However, this is particularly spiky in this phase if the soaker that's trying to get all the unstable souls in this phase doesn't actually manage to get them all. And if some of them cross the raid, that's going to be a huge spike. Other than that, just like for DPS, when you get Shared Fate in the normal phase, make sure you quickly find the player you're linked to and run to them. If you get Touch of Doomed, quickly run towards the outside edge or the wall before that debuff expires. And then when it expires, you'll drop a puddle away from the raid, so you're safe there. And then finally, if you get Hunger for Life, you'll be kiting a construct, so make sure you run until it dies. Don't try to get in melee range of it or you'll get killed. So, believe it or not, that's everything in this fight. Once Feast of Soul ends, you just go back in phase 1 and the whole process repeats, starting at the top with the sucking of players down into the stomach and ordering all that crazy rotation and yada 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 until 2 minutes more pass, and then you get another Feast of Souls, and this keeps going over. So the soft and rage on this fight is essentially the puddles, because eventually the room will fill up with puddles that you just won't be able to stand anywhere. So if you're having trouble finding space, make sure you're maximizing the area around the room that you're utilizing to get rid of those, and not putting them somewhere crappy like in the center of the room. And if you are doing that and you're still running out of room, then it means that your damage just isn't high enough. So try to really save your cooldowns for that Feast of Souls, keeping in mind that also the better you do in the stomach phase, the less damage you have to waste dealing with all the adds that would otherwise have just been killed down below in the first place. So as always, good luck, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. In a way, I'm like a mother bird regurgitating up this nutritious guide for you. You're a baby bird just gobbling it up, and so thankful, just like Gorefiend. So if you appreciate that scrumptious meal, subscribe. We'd be all happy.